I never really believed in the supernatural. Not until recently. But the events I'm about to tell you have changed my mind. The events have been sitting heavily on my mind, and I thought, maybe, if I share it, if I get it out there, it might help. Maybe someone will know what's going on, or at least maybe it'll keep me from losing my mind, so here goes. I was desperate for work. The job I thought I had lined up in Willock fell through, and the bills were piling up. That's when I stumbled upon a help wanted ad for a job working the night shift at a fast food joint called Quick Bite, Chicken, Burgers, and Shakes. I remember chuckling to myself thinking, what kind of place can't decide if it's a chicken joint or a burger shack? Might as well throw in shakes and call it a day. The location, too, was odd. The restaurant was nestled on the edge of Pembrose, a town that once buzzed with life but now lay mostly abandoned, at least the part of town where the Quick Bite was located. The area had once been a thriving place, but over time, store by store, business by business, it had been abandoned. The only real signs of life left in the area was a hospital, an old fire station, a few doctor's offices, there mainly because of the hospital, and of course, the Quick Bite restaurant. The hospital had been buying up the area, and the hospital planned to build a number of buildings in the future. I tell you all of this so that you'll understand the area. Anyway, I dialed up the restaurant and arranged for an interview the following day. The next morning, as I pulled into the parking lot, the place had an eerie stillness, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. Jim, the manager, was a rotund man with a stern face that seemed etched with years of secrets, but his eyes, there was a kindness there, a sadness too. We sat in a booth, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzing softly. The interview was surprisingly straightforward. Jim began by explaining that the job was to work the night shift in the restaurant from 8 p.m. until 5 a.m. The dining room closed at 10 p.m., but the drive-thru was open 24/7. After I told him that I understood and that it sounded great, what was I going to say? I needed the job. Jim asked me a few basic questions, then gave me a brief tour, and then made me the offer. The pay was generous, suspiciously so. But desperation has a way of silencing doubts. I accepted. "Great, you'll start tonight," Jim had said, and we shook hands and I headed home. Later that day, I returned to start my shift. The sun was beginning its descent as I pulled into the parking lot. The restaurant's sign was faded from years of weathering, and it buzzed and flickered. I stepped out of my car, the gravel crunching underfoot, and I took a moment to take in the surroundings. All of the nearby buildings were abandoned, and I hadn't seen a single car since I arrived in town. I headed towards the entrance. Pushing the door open, the bell jingled, announcing my arrival. The interior was a stark contrast to the desolation outside. It was brightly lit with the aroma of fried chicken wafting through the air. Jim stood behind the counter. "Robert, welcome back." Jim's voice was jolly. "You're early. Good. Let's get started." The next few hours were a blur. Jim introduced me to the other employees. A wiry young woman named Jill with a no-nonsense attitude was in charge of the drive-thru and helped the manager man the counter in the dining area. The cook was a silent, burly man who communicated mostly with nods. They showed me the ropes from the layout of the kitchen to the intricacies of the drive-thru system. As the evening wore on, a few customers dropped in, but it was pretty quiet. So quiet, in fact, that by 10 p.m., the three of us were already deep in the throes of cleaning. The cook, in between his tasks, took the time to walk me through the kitchen operations. He even went the extra mile of preparing a batch of food in advance to ensure that I wouldn't be overwhelmed later in the night. I wondered when he said that. Like I said, we had had a few customers throughout the evening, not too many though, and I really doubted that I would be swamped through the night shift. Midnight approached faster than I expected. Jill had finished up her duties a few minutes before and headed out. The cook finished his duties, gave me a nod, and left, leaving me alone with Jem. Jem handed me a set of keys, rattling off a few last-minute instructions. I told him that I understood, and I began to mentally prepare myself for running the place alone all night. I felt that I was ready. Then, Jem's parting gift caught me off guard. As I was finishing wiping the front counter, Jem approached holding out a 1-inch binder. "Here," he said, his voice lower than before. "You'll need this. Follow the rules to the letter." I took the binder, its weight oddly heavy in my hands. Before I could ask anything, Jem was already heading for the exit. But just as he reached the door, he paused, turning back to me with a smile. "Oh, and Robert. The ice cream machine. It's cursed. Good luck." And with that, he was gone, leaving me alone in the silence of the quick bite. I locked the door behind him and then made my way back to the counter, the binder in my hand. Settling into the chair by the drive-thru, I opened the binder, ready to delve into whatever it held. The first page read, "Rules for the night shift." I took a deep breath and I began to read. Rule 1. Always wear your uniform and the name tag. They recognize the uniform, not your face. Rule 2. Always keep at least a few packets of salt in your pocket. You never know when you might need it. Rule 3. Do not allow any deliveries after midnight, no matter how normal they may sound. Rule 4. Father Bernard may stop by and knock on the door. If he does, let him in and give him anything he orders. He'll want to pay, but he eats free. He is the only person to be allowed into the dining room after hours. If he insists on paying, ask him to bless the ice cream machine. Rule 5. The statue out front will change positions overnight. Pay it no mind, it's a friend. Rule 6. The mascot costume in the back room should never be worn. If you see someone wearing it inside the restaurant, hide. Rule 7. If you see a child in the play area after midnight, do not approach. Call the number in the emergency manual and do as instructed. Rule 8. Do not acknowledge the faceless figure that appears in the dining room every night at 4:03 a.m. He will eventually leave on his own. Rule 9. The clown painting in the manager's office may attempt to talk to you. If it does, remind it that you are on the clock. Rule 10. If someone knocks on the back door, do not open it, no matter how human they sound. And don't bother checking the cameras. They won't show up on the footage. Rule 11. The condiments and utensils have a habit of rearranging themselves into strange symbols when no one is looking. If this happens, take the notebook and sketch out their arrangement and note the date and time. At the end of your shift, leave the notebook by the manager's locker. Rule 12. At 12:44 a.m., leave an order of fries, a bacon cheeseburger with pickles, and a chocolate milkshake on the counter and go to the kitchen. Do not leave the kitchen until 2:50 a.m. The meal is for the one who watches. When you return to the counter, the order will be gone and the exact amount for the items will be on the counter. Place the money in the cash register and say, "Thank you, enjoy your meal." Rule 13. Never look into the security cameras between 3 a.m. and 3:15 a.m. You might see something you wish you hadn't, and if you do, you won't be the same. Rule 14. Always respond to the drive-thru intercom with, "We're closed between the hours of 3:22 and 3:28 a.m. Rule 15. If the drive-thru speaker starts talking in a language that you don't understand, walk away and do not respond. Rule 16. If a car pulls up to the drive-thru but no one is driving, ignore it. They will eventually drive away. Rule 17. Never investigate footprints that appear wet and muddy, especially if they lead to the freezer. Mop them up and don't enter the freezer for 20 minutes. Rule 18. If you stumble on a note with your name on it, do not read it. Burn it on the grill. Rule 19. Should the deep fryer turn on by itself, turn it off and pour salt around it. This will ward off what lurks beneath its surface. I stared at the binder, the weight of its contents pressing down on me. The rules, each more bizarre than the last, seemed like some twisted initiation rite. That's all I could think that it must be, some sort of prank. I quickly shot off a text to Jim, my fingers tapping against the screen with a mix of amusement and disbelief. And I'll admit, a touch of annoyance. "Hey Jem, nice joke with the rules. Nearly had me there," I wrote. The reply came back almost instantly. "It's no joke, Rob. Follow them to the letter." I frowned, typing back, "Come on, what's really going on?" "Like I said, it's all true. Stick to the rules and you'll be fine. Good luck," he replied. I sat there, the glow of the phone illuminating my face in the dim light of the restaurant. The weight of uncertainty settled in my chest. Was this some elaborate prank? Before I could ponder any further, the chime of the drive-thru interrupted my thoughts. The voice that crackled through the speaker was unlike any that I've ever heard. Distorted, almost inhuman. I recalled the rule about responding with, "We're closed" during certain hours, but a glance at the clock told me that it wasn't that time yet. With a hesitant breath, I took the order. It was extensive, and for a moment, panic set in. How long was it going to take me to prepare this much food? To my surprise, the kitchen was stocked with pre-made items, even the more customized ones. It was like the cook had anticipated this very order. As I gathered the items, my eyes landed on the ice cream machine. The cursed machine. I scoffed, reaching out to operate it. The customer had ordered a sundae. I pulled the lever, but instead of the usual hum, it growled, deep and ominous. I chuckled to myself. Of course, it's broken. As I turned to head back to the drive-thru window, a strange, whispery chittering emanated from the machine. I shook my head, dismissing it as my imagination playing tricks on me. Approaching the drive-thru window, I prepared to inform the customer that the machine was broken. I hoped that they wouldn't be too mad. I slid open the window, greeted by the sight of an SUV with windows so dark that they seemed to swallow the light. As the driver's window descended, I was met with a sight that made my heart skip a beat. The driver was hairy, with an elongated, almost deformed face.
Yes,
it rasped. I swallowed hard, forcing words out. I'm sorry, the ice cream machine seems to be out of order. The creature chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down my spine.
Mabel's cursed it again. No matter. Next time, perhaps.
I handed over the bags, trying to avoid direct eye contact. But as I did, the creature spoke again, its voice dripping with amusement.
Thanks, Ted. See you tomorrow night.
The SUV pulled away. I blinked in confusion. It's Rob, I murmured, more to myself than to the creature. But as it drove away, I glanced down at my name tag. It read Ted. Of course. And they only recognized the uniform. I leaned against the counter, my fingers drumming a nervous rhythm. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. I remembered the rule about the salt. Old superstitions, maybe a prank. But for some reason, I went and I grabbed a handful of salt packets, shoving them into my pockets. I looked outside. The parking lot stretched out, vast and empty. My old sedan sat under the Quick Bite sign, its paint chipped and faded. I could just hop in and drive away, leave all this weirdness behind. It would be the sane thing to do, but I needed the paycheck. Bills weren't going to pay themselves, and Willick wasn't exactly brimming with job opportunities. Besides, I was probably just working myself up, and all over a joke. My gaze drifted to the clown statue by the entrance. It was a grotesque thing, reminiscent of those 80s-era McDonald's mascots. The clown, with its exaggerated smile and bulbous nose, sat on a bench. Both were made from the same chunk of gray, unpainted concrete. The craftsmanship was shoddy at best, making the whole thing look like a knockoff, which is what it was. A budget Mickey D's. That's exactly the description of this place. I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. Get it together, Rob, I muttered. With a deep breath, I tried to shake off the unease. I thought about my duties. What did I need to do? We had nearly finished cleaning the restaurant. All that was really left to do was to mop the floor in the dining area. So I went and got a mop and started to work. The mop's rhythmic swish against the tiles was almost therapeutic. The dim overhead lights cast a muted glow, making the water in the bucket shimmer as I wrung out the mop. Finishing up, I stowed the mop and bucket in their respective places and ambled back to the counter. I pulled out my phone, thumbing through the notifications. I expected it to be a peaceful night. But then there was a sound. Soft, squelching footsteps, which pulled me from my reverie. I looked up, half expecting to see a late-night customer that had somehow gotten into the restaurant. But just like it should have been, the place was empty. My gaze trailed to the floor, where a trail of muddy footprints led into the kitchen. A chill ran down my spine. I followed the footprints. They seemed to end at the freezer door. For a fleeting moment, curiosity tugged at me, urging me to open it. But then the rules Jem had given me flashed in my mind. I decided to trace the footprints back to their origin instead. I was certain that we had locked all of the doors, so I wanted to know where they had come from. The footprints trail led me to the men's restroom. With a deep breath, I nudged the door open. They continued inside, leading to the furthest stall. My heart raced as I pushed the stall door open, half expecting to find someone or something inside. But it was, of course, empty. I remembered cleaning the bathroom earlier. The doors to the restaurant had been locked before this, and we had spent 2 hours cleaning the place. Like I said, I cleaned this stall myself. There was no way that someone could have hidden in here. But the footprints were there. Shaking my head, I decided to stick to the rules. No deviations. Whatever they said, that was what I was gonna do. Even if they were some part of an elaborate prank, well, for some reason, I just felt like I should follow them. So I cleaned up the footprints, ensuring that no trace remained. Back at the counter, I pulled out the binder of rules, intending to go over them once more. But just then, a soft tapping sound reached my ears. Not from the freezer in the back, but from the front of the restaurant. I looked up, and through the glass door, I saw him. A priest. He was tall, with a gaunt face, his skin pale against the dark color of his cassock. Feeling a little uneasy, I approached the door and unlocked it. The priest stepped in, his gaze never leaving mine. I quickly locked the door behind him. "Good evening," he greeted, his voice warm. He extended a hand. "I'm Father Bernard." I shook his hand. "Robert," I said. "Nice to meet you, Robert. You must be Sam's replacement," he said. "Yeah, I guess. Tonight's my first night on the job," I replied. "Excellent. Well, I hope you'll like it here," Father Bernard said. "My congregation's in Willock, but I find myself in Pembrose a few times each month. I like to stop by here and eat on my way back home. I know it's late. I hope that it's not too much of a bother to eat inside. I've never been one for eating in my car." It's not a problem, Father. It's nice to have some company, especially with how odd things have been around here." He raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Oh yes, that's part of the reason I come to Pembrose, actually." I waited for him to continue, but he didn't. Instead, he moved to the counter, scanning the menu briefly. I went around the counter to the register. "What can I get you?" I asked. "I'll have the chicken and burger meal, please," he responded. As he reached for his wallet, I remembered the rules. It's on the house, Father," I told him. He looked taken aback. "I can't let you do that. I've told Jim that I have to pay." I shrugged and responded, "It's one of our rules. You eat free." He chuckled. "Trying to get on the good side of the Almighty." I grinned. "Yeah, something like that, I guess. But really, it is one of our rules. You eat free." "Well, I really do wish Jim would just let me pay," the father said. "Well, the rules do say that you can bless the ice cream machine." He laughed, a deep, hearty sound. "Oh, Mabel's been here again. I'll bless it before I leave." And with that, he went and sat down at a table. I prepared his meal, deliberately avoiding the freezer, as per the rules. Once done, I carried it over to his table, then returned to the counter. From there, I watched him bow his head in prayer before digging in. The sight was oddly comforting. I pulled out the rules and started to read them. I wanted to make sure that I hadn't missed anything. After about 10 minutes, Father Bernard finished his meal and approached the counter. "Shall we see about that ice cream machine now?" he asked. I led him to it, and he murmured a blessing, making the sign of the cross. Then we tested it, and to my astonishment, it worked perfectly. I handed him a cone, gratitude evident in my eyes. "Thank you, Father," I said. He smiled. "Anytime, my son. You have a good evening." I walked him to the door, locking it behind him. As I turned back to the counter, I couldn't help but feel a little lighter. Maybe, just maybe, things would be okay. I headed back behind the counter. I looked at the now blessed and working ice cream machine. I felt that I deserved a treat, so I went and made myself a cone. The hum of the ice cream machine filled the silence as I pulled the lever, watching the soft swirl of vanilla curl into the cone. The dim light from the overheads cast an eerie glow on the stainless steel. I took a moment to savor the cold sweetness, letting it melt on my tongue, a brief respite from the strangeness of the night. When I had first read those rules, I had laughed. It had to be some kind of initiation prank for the new guy. Part of me still thought that. But now, after the footprints, after the priest, after that customer, I wasn't so sure. The rules might be a joke, but they might not. A shiver ran down my spine, not from the cold of the ice cream, but from a realization. Mabel. The name echoed in my mind. Jim, the priest, and the odd customer had all mentioned her. They had all seemed to believe that she had cursed the ice cream machine. It was even assumed that it would be cursed in the rules. Maybe it could be a prank, but the machine wouldn't work. Then it was blessed and it worked. Father Bernard hadn't even touched the machine, so it wasn't like he did any repairs, so I took another bite of the ice cream, trying to push the thoughts from my mind. For now, all that I could do was follow the rules. I glanced at the clock. The clock's red digits blinked at me. 12:57 a.m. I had the rules laying on the counter. I traced my finger down the list, ensuring that I hadn't missed anything. My eyes lingered on the instructions for 2:44 a.m. The meal for the one who watches. I mentally calculated the time that I would need to prepare it. If I started a little after 2:30 a.m., that should do it. With that settled, I leaned back on the counter, allowing myself a moment of respite. I pulled out my phone, thumbing through social media. The soft hum of the restaurant's machinery, a comforting background noise. But that comfort was short-lived. The drive-thru alarm jolted me from my scrolling. I quickly went to the drive-thru station. I glanced at the monitor with the camera that covered the drive-thru, not wanting any more surprises. A Honda Civic sat in the drive-thru lane, its headlights piercing the darkness. A woman sat behind the wheel, her face half illuminated by the car's interior lights. Pushing the talk button, I cleared my throat. "Welcome to Quick Bite. What can I get you tonight?" There was a brief pause before her voice, clear and a little tired, responded. "Just a hamburger, fries, and a medium Coke, please." "All right, that'll be $7.50. Please drive up to the window," I said. I set to work assembling the burger and fries. The sizzle of the patty on the grill, the hiss of the soda machine filling the cup, it all felt reassuringly normal. I opened the window, the cool night air brushing against my face. She handed me a $10 bill. There was a weariness in her eyes, the kind that comes from long hours on the road or perhaps a long day at work. "Long night?" I ventured, handing her the change. She offered a half smile, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. You could say that. I nodded, understanding all too well. Well, I hope this helps. Safe travels. She thanked me, her car pulling away and disappearing into the night. I watched it go, the weight of the evening pressing down on me once more. The rules, the oddities, the unknowns, they all loomed large. But for now, in this brief moment, there was at least a semblance of normalcy, and I clung to it. I went back and leaned against the counter, again pulling my phone out, checking the time. 1:07 a.m. I swiped through a few apps, considering playing a game to pass the time, but then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a flicker of movement. I looked up, my heart skipping a beat. There, in the dimly lit play area, was a child. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7 based on height, wearing a black hoodie. She stood at the base of the slide, her face turned towards the side window. I froze, my mind racing. The rules. I remembered one about kids in the play area. I flipped open the notebook and looked at them again. My eyes scanned the list until they landed on rule number 6. If you see a child in the play area after midnight, do not approach. Call the number in the emergency manual and do as instructed. I rushed to the back, my heart pounding. I found the emergency manual. It was a laminated booklet, only a few pages. It hung on the wall from a small hook right where Jim had said it would be. I grabbed it, flipping through the pages looking for the number. I saw all the normal stuff. Police, fire, medical, plumber, etc. Finally, I saw Entity Encounters Response Team, followed by a phone number. Underneath it was written, 4 sightings of unaccompanied minors in the play area post-midnight. Without hesitation, I dialed. As the phone rang, I cautiously moved closer to the front, peeking around the corner to keep an eye on the girl. She was now playing with the tic-tac-toe game on the wall. I watched, my breath catching in my throat. She placed an X in the top left corner. She paused, tilting her head slightly. Then, to my horror, one of the blocks slowly turned on its own, stopping on an O. The phone was answered by a raspy voice.
Yes.
It hissed. There's a child in the play area, I whispered, my voice shaky. The rules say to call this number. There was a pause.
What is your location?
The Quick Bite in Pimbrose, I said.
Yes.
The voice replied, a hint of familiarity in its tone.
She likes that one. I will inform the parents. Do not approach the child. Understood?
I nodded, then realizing that the voice couldn't see me. Understood, I managed to say.
Someone will be there shortly to retrieve her.
The voice said, and then the line went dead. I slowly peeked back at the play area. The kid was still playing tic-tac-toe. The hoodie she wore obscured her face, casting it in shadow. I ducked down, my heart racing. The rules had been clear. Do not approach the child. I crept closer, hiding behind the counter, peeking just enough to watch the game unfold. The child would move a block, and then, eerily, another block would shift on its own. The game seemed to be against an invisible opponent. The game ended in a draw. The child's reaction was immediate and intense. It let out a frustrated scream that sent shivers down my spine, and it charged into the ball pit. It began hurling balls in every direction. The chaos lasted for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 5 minutes. I couldn't see the child's face, but its anger was palpable. Then, as suddenly as the tantrum had begun, it stopped. The child moved on to the jungle gym, climbing and sliding as if nothing had happened. I tried to calm my racing heart, reminding myself of the rules. The sudden glare of headlights from the outside caught my attention. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up, its windows so darkly tinted that I couldn't see inside. The child noticed too and paused in its play. An extremely tall and pale woman emerged from the passenger's side, her stride confident. She paused halfway to the door, her gaze fixed on the child. The child kicked one of the balls on the ground, sending it rolling across the floor. Then it made its way to the exit. Without thinking, I slowly rose from behind the counter, transfixed on the scene that was unfolding before me. The woman noticed me and our eyes met. Her eyes were completely pitch black. No whites, no irises, just an endless void. The child reached her and she shifted her attention to it. She and the child looked at each other for a moment, a silent communication passing between them. Then the child reached up and pulled back its hoodie. The girl's skin was as pale as the woman's. Her eyes, the same pitch black. The two stood for a moment, staring at me. Then the woman took the child's hand and they walked back to the car. The child got into the back seat and right before the door closed, the child waved. A simple gesture that felt out of place given the circumstances. The woman got into the car and the Mercedes pulled away. I slumped back down behind the counter. Pulling out my phone, the bright screen momentarily blinded me. 1:50 a.m. it read. It felt like I'd been here for an eternity. The night had been a relentless onslaught of bizarre events, and I was only halfway through my shift. I glanced around, trying to find something to occupy my mind. The play area was a mess. The child, or whatever it had been, had thrown balls everywhere. They lay scattered, a sea of multicolored orbs. I sighed and I started to clean it up. As I neared the end of my task, I noticed something out the window. The statue of the old clown, it wasn't in the same pose it had been in earlier. Its eyes were now fixed on me, its smile even wider. It was giving me a thumbs up. A shiver ran down my spine. The rules had mentioned the statue. It was a friend. Taking a deep breath, I forced a smile onto my face and with a shaky hand, I returned the thumbs up. The statue remained motionless, its gaze unwavering. I quickly turned away, my heart pounding in my chest. I finished up cleaning the play area as quickly as I could. As soon as I finished, I exited the play area. As I made my way back through the dining area, the soft hum of the overhead lights was the only sound that accompanied my footsteps. But then, a loud, rhythmic knocking broke the silence. Following the sound, it led me down the back hall to the back door. I approached cautiously, my heart rate quickening with each step. The door was a behemoth. Thick metal with two deadbolts, one above and one below the handle. A heavy metal security crossbar ran across its width, making it look more like the entrance to a vault than a fast food joint. The knocking grew louder, more insistent, causing the door to rattle in its reinforced frame. Whatever was on the other side had strength. Who is it?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady.
"Delivery,"
came the response. The voice was impossibly deep, yet wheezy, like the sound of a large animal trying to mimic human speech. I hesitated, my mind racing back to the rules Jem had given me. Come back tomorrow, I replied, hoping that would be the end of it. There was a brief silence, then the voice responded, sounding irritated.
Oh, come on.
It paused, and I could almost picture it clearing its throat.
I drove a long way to get here,
it said, the tone now a little sweeter, a little more human-like, but something about it still felt off. I took a deep breath, recalling rule number 9. If someone knocks on the back door claiming that they have a delivery, do not open it, no matter how human they sound. No, sorry. You'll have to come back tomorrow when the manager's here, I replied firmly. The sigh that followed was deep and guttural, almost like a roar. Then came the pounding, each thud echoing through the restaurant, shaking the very foundations.
Open up,
the voice growled, its tone no longer sweet, but demanding and menacing. Backing away from the door, my mind raced. I needed to see what was out there. I made my way back to the manager's office, hoping that the security cameras would give me a glimpse of the intruder. I went to the desk and switched on the monitors, cycling through the camera feeds. The back door camera gave me a clear view of the outside, but it showed nothing. The pounding on the door echoed in my ears, a relentless rhythm that sent shivers down my spine. The voice, distorted and desperate, continued its incessant yelling. I leaned back in the chair, my heart racing, trying to make sense of the situation. Told you there wouldn't be anything. It doesn't appear on the cameras. A voice, smooth and almost jovial, remarked from behind me. Yeah, I know, I just hope… I began, my voice trailing off. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Someone was in the room with me, and they were right behind me. I spun around, my chair squeaking in protest, and came face to face with a painting. An elderly clown with rosy cheeks and a wide grin stared back at me. My scream echoed in the small room. Calm down, son, the clown in the painting said, his voice soothing. The clown hooked his fingers into the lapels of his suit coat. It can't get through the door. It's as sturdy as the day I had it installed, and that's just the door. The wards Mabel's got on it is even stronger. Unless you open the door, you're safe. I blinked, trying to process what was happening. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. But there was none. The painting was talking to me. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't think that we've been introduced, the clown said, its painted eyes twinkling. I'm Hatch. Welcome to Quick Bites. Hi, I stammered, my voice shaky. I'm Robert. Nice to meet you, Robbie, Hatch exclaimed, his painted smile never wavering. We're glad to have you on the team. If you ever have any problems, you just let me know. How are you enjoying the job so far? It's great, I replied, still in shock. I mean, it's a little weird, but otherwise… Great, don't you worry about it. You'll get used to it. And as long as you follow the rules, you'll be fine. So, tell me about yourself, Hatch said, his painted face leaning in with genuine interest. I remembered one of the rules about not engaging in prolonged conversation with the clown painting. I'd love to, Hatch, but I'm on the clock and I need to get back out into the store, I said, trying to sound polite. Oh, of course, excellent. You are a good and conscientious employee, Hatch replied, his tone understanding. I nodded, quickly leaving the office. The pounding on the door had stopped and the restaurant was silent once more. I checked the clock, 2:05 a.m. I still had some time before I needed to prepare the meal for the one that watches, whatever that was. I headed back to my spot behind the counter. I pulled out my phone, swiped through the apps, and finally found my game. As it loaded, I glanced around the room. My eyes landed on a worn envelope, its edges frayed and stained. It lay just beside the register. I knew for a fact it hadn't been there earlier. Even more concerning, my name, Robert, was scrawled across the front in faded ink. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and the age of the envelope suggested that it had been there for quite some time. Rule 17 flashed in my mind. If you stumble on a note with your name on it, do not read it. Burn it on the grill. With a sense of urgency, I rushed to the grill and cranked it up, its flames leaping hungrily. The heat radiated against my face as I hesitated for just a moment. Then I tossed the envelope onto the searing metal. The flames roared to life, engulfing the paper in a fiery embrace. A ghostly scream, high-pitched and filled with anguish, echoed through the kitchen. It was as if the very walls were crying out in pain. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. The scream faded, leaving behind only the crackling of the dying flames. The grill returned to its idle state, the envelope reduced to ashes. Taking a deep breath, I turned and headed back towards the counter. As I did, though, a whisper, cold and menacing, drifted from the direction of the grill.
Next time.
I froze for a second before returning to the counter and the game on my phone. The night pressed on. The dim light of the kitchen cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound breaking the silence. I glanced at the clock, the red numbers glaring back at me, 2:39 a.m. Following the rules to the letter, I'd prepared the meal for the one who watches. A fresh order of fries, still sizzling from the fryer, a bacon cheeseburger with just the right amount of pickles, and a large chocolate milkshake. I glanced at the clock, 2:43 a.m. I headed to the counter. I placed the meal on the counter and headed back to the kitchen. The rules were clear. Leave the meal and retreat to the kitchen. No peeking, no questions, just wait. I did as instructed. Hiding in the kitchen, I pulled out my phone again to distract myself. The digital world was a welcome escape from the bizarre reality of quick bite after dark. I scrolled through social media, distracting myself, if only for a moment. But my eyes kept darting to the clock, watching as the minutes ticked by. 2:46 a.m. The silence was deafening. My mind raced, imagining what or who might be out there, collecting their meal. The rules had been right about everything so far, so I wasn't about to test them now. 2:48 a.m. I could feel the weight of curiosity, the urge to peek growing stronger, but I resisted. The rules were there for a reason. 2:50 a.m. Finally, it was time. I stood up, my legs feeling strangely weak, and I made my way to the counter. The meal was gone. In its place, the exact change lay neatly stacked, just as the rules had said. I scooped up the money and placed it in the cash register. "Thank you," I said. "Enjoy your meal." As I turned to head back to the kitchen, something caught my eye. The clown statue had shifted again, and now it was turned towards the inside of the restaurant. Its eyes again stared at me, still smiling. And it was waving directly at me. I mean, its arm was still, but it was as if it had frozen mid-wave. I headed back to the drive-thru station and took a seat there. I really didn't want to be stared at by that statue, even if it was friendly. I glanced at the list of rules again, my eyes catching the warning about the security cameras. 3 a.m. was approaching, and I made a mental note to steer clear of the office. If I didn't go in there, I couldn't see the cameras. I also wouldn't see the clown. I mean, the last thing I needed was another encounter with the clown painting. I remembered the monitors showing the drive-thru. I stood up and walked over to it and unplugged it. And that took care of that rule. I sat back down. Pulling out my earbuds, I decided to distract myself with a podcast. The familiar voice of the host filled my ears, momentarily pushing away the eerie atmosphere of Quickbite. But it wasn't long before another sound broke through the podcast's narrative. A sizzling, like something was frying. I shot up from my seat following the sound to the kitchen. The deep fryer was on, its oil bubbling and popping. I knew that I hadn't turned it on. The rules flashed through my mind, and I quickly reached to shut it off. But as I did, a grotesque face began to form in the oil, its features contorting in a silent scream. Teeth, or what looked like teeth, bared at me, and I stumbled back in horror. Suddenly, an oily hand began to emerge, reaching out as if to grab me. Panic surged through me. I remembered the rules, and my eyes darted around the kitchen. They finally landed on a canister of salt. I grabbed the canister, flinging its contents into the fryer. The oil hissed and spat, the hand losing its form and sinking back into the depths. But the face remained, its eyes seething with a malevolence that sent shivers down my spine. I poured a circle of salt around the fryer, just like the rules instructed. With the circle complete, I took a few steps back, watching as the oil slowly cooled down, the face dissipating until all that remained was a smooth, reflective surface. My heart raced, and I could feel sweat on my brow. I made my way to the front of the restaurant, grabbing handfuls of salt packets from the condiments counter and stuffing them into every pocket that I had. I went back to the kitchen and grabbed another canister of salt. Then I returned to my seat. I didn't even bother to pull out my phone. The events of the night were starting to get to me. I just wanted the night to end. I wanted to go home, crawl into bed, and forget that all of this had ever happened. But I was stuck here in this godforsaken place until morning. The sudden ding of the drive-thru startled me from my thoughts. I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly, and I made my way over. I was about to respond when I glanced at the clock. 3:25 a.m. I remembered the rule. Taking a deep breath, I pressed the button. "We're closed," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The intercom crackled to life. A voice distorted and hungry whispered, "Feed." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "I'm sorry, we're closed," I repeated, hoping that it would go away. There was a pause, and then the intercom hissed again, this time with a disappointed sigh. It was as if whatever was on the other side had been denied a long-awaited meal. I slowly backed away from the window, my eyes darting around the room, half expecting to see some creature lurking in the shadows. But of course there was nothing. I had done what the rules said, and once again, I would be okay. I returned to my seat, my body heavy with exhaustion. The next few minutes were peaceful. After sitting there for a while, trying to gather my composure, I thought about the rules. The next thing that was supposed to happen was the faceless figure that would supposedly appear at 4:03. I glanced at the clock. It was 4 a.m. I had no reason now to doubt that the figure would appear. The rules had been so real so far. I rose from my seat, my shoes squeaking slightly against the polished floor, and I took a cautious peek towards the front of the store. Empty. I retreated to my seat, trying to shake off the unease that settled in my chest. The minutes ticked by slowly, each second stretching out like an eternity. At 4:03 a.m., I felt a compulsion to look again. I leaned forward, peering into the dining area. There, in the middle of the room, stood a figure. A man, or at least something in the shape of one, dressed in a polo shirt and khaki trousers, stood. But his face was smooth, featureless, like a mannequin's. My heart raced as he seemed to scan the room, his head turning slowly, methodically. I ducked back behind the counter, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The rules echoed in my mind. Do not acknowledge the faceless figure. I pressed myself against the wall, praying that he hadn't seen me. The sound of shuffling feet reached my ears, but I dared not look. Every instinct screamed at me to stay hidden, to not risk being seen. After a few minutes, the shuffling stopped, and silence enveloped the room once more. I counted to 100, then 200, then 300, trying to muster the courage to look again. Finally, I took a deep breath and I peered out. The dining area was empty again. With a sigh of relief, I stepped out from behind the counter, my eyes darting around, checking under tables and around the corner. Nothing. The restaurant was as it should be, save for one thing. The statue outside the window was looking directly at me. No surprises there. Its hand was raised, signaling okay. I stared at it, a mix of gratitude and confusion washing over me. Was it telling me that everything was all right, or was it asking me if I was okay? I hesitated for a moment, then, with a shaky smile, I raised my thumb, giving the statue a thumbs up. Whatever had just happened, I was starting to feel grateful for the statue's silent companionship. Since I was already out in the dining area, I decided that now would be a good time for a bathroom break. I was literally only in there for a minute. As I exited the room, still drying my hands, my foot caught on something, causing me to stumble slightly. I looked down and froze. Utensils were everywhere. They sprawled out in front of the counter in a chaotic yet oddly deliberate pattern. Forks, knives, spoons, all intertwined in a way that seemed to form symbols, I guess. My heart raced and a cold sweat formed on my brow. I remembered the rules. Rule 10. I had to sketch this. I quickly made my way behind the counter, searching for the notebook the rules had mentioned, but I couldn't find it. I moved into the kitchen, scanning every shelf, opening every drawer. Nothing. Panic began to set in. I needed that notebook. The rules had been clear, and I wasn't about to deviate from them now. With a deep breath, I decided to check the manager's office. Maybe Jim had left it in there. As I entered, my eyes darted around, searching for the elusive notebook. Still, it was nowhere in sight. I felt a growing sense of dread. What would happen if I didn't follow the rules? Then a voice broke the silence. "Looking for something, son?" I spun around, my heart in my throat. The clown painting on the wall, its eyes seemingly following me, had spoken again. I took a moment, trying to process the absurdity of the situation. "Yeah," I finally managed to say. The utensils, they're in a weird pattern, and I'm supposed to draw the pattern in a notebook, but I can't find it," I explained. The clown chuckled, a sound that was both comforting and eerie. "Utensils in a pattern, yeah, they do that. The notebook's probably in the back room. Jem keeps forgetting to put it back. He's supposed to put it by the emergency manual. I gotta talk to that boy about that." "Oh, okay, thanks," I said. "Don't mention it," the clown replied with a grin, its painted face crinkling into a massive smile. "I'm glad to help." With a nod, I left the office, heading to the back room. The back room was basically a storage closet with the employee lockers. I hadn't ventured much into this space, only going there once to stow away my jacket in the locker that had been assigned to me. The room smelled of stale air and cardboard, a stark contrast to the aroma of fried food that permeated the rest of Quick Bite. I approached the lockers. I checked the names on each one until I found Jem's locker. Atop it lay a worn-out notebook, its pages yellowed with age. I picked it up and flipped through it. Diagrams of utensils in various layouts filled each page. All were meticulously detailed. The patterns were eerily similar to the ones that I had seen in the dining area. I felt a shiver run down my spine. What was the significance of these patterns? Why were they being documented? Lost in thought, my foot caught on something soft yet firm. I stumbled, barely catching my balance. Looking down, I found the culprit. The restaurant's mascot costume. The absurdity of its design struck me once again. A chicken wearing a white suit. It was as if the owner couldn't decide whether to rip off McDonald's or KFC. There was the clown statue out front, clearly ripping off Mickey D's. The painting in the manager's office, and now this, wore white suits, and of course, the clown had an odd southern drawl. It was all so bizarre. I chuckled to myself, imagining the owner's thought process. Shaking my head, I made my way back to the dining area, notebook in hand. I took a deep breath, trying to capture the exact layout of the utensils. My hand moved across the page, sketching each fork, knife, and spoon. I'm not much of an artist, but I hoped that my drawing would suffice. Once I was satisfied, I gathered up the utensils and I tossed them into the trash. Returning to the back room, I placed the notebook back on top of Jem's locker. As I turned to leave, I noticed it. The mascot costume was gone. I was puzzled for a second. Then, a chill ran down my spine. I remembered Rule 5 as clear as day. The mascot costume in the back room should never be worn. If you see someone wearing it inside the restaurant, hide. When I'd first read it, I had laughed it off, thinking of it as some kind of inside joke among the staff. But after everything I had seen tonight, I knew better. This was no joke. None of the rules were. Every one had been made for a reason. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. The hallway was empty, but that provided little comfort. Where could I hide? The manager's office? The kitchen? The freezer? My mind raced, trying to weigh the pros and cons of each option. I cautiously crept towards the manager's office, hoping to find some semblance of safety there. Weirdly, I thought that maybe the clown might have some idea of what I could do. But as I peeked inside, my heart sank. The clown from the painting was gone, leaving behind only an empty frame. The security monitors flickered with static now. I gently tugged at the office door, but it creaked in protest and I stopped, hoping that the mascot hadn't heard it. Even if I had been able to close the door, it wouldn't have been much protection anyway. It was too flimsy, too weak. At this point, I was on the verge of panic. Every second counted, and I couldn't afford to waste any more time. I needed to find a hiding spot, and fast. The thought of that mascot costume, of someone or something wearing it, hunting me down, well, it was enough to send shivers down my spine. I retreated from the office, my eyes darting around for any sign of movement. I considered opening the back door, but moving the security bar and the deadbolts was bound to make noise, and it would take some time. I wasn't sure how fast the mascot was, but being trapped at the end of the hallway it seemed terrible. So I crept further down the hall towards the kitchen. I inched my way down the dimly lit hallway, my heart pounding so loudly that I was sure that it would give away my position. The kitchen was just ahead. As I reached the door, I risked a quick glance. The kitchen looked empty, but I couldn't be sure. Maybe I could hide in the freezer. Yeah, that was my initial thought. Taking a deep breath, I slipped into the kitchen. But as I did, a shadow caught my eye. The mascot. That grotesque, oversized caricature was clambering over the counter, its movements jerky and unnatural. It landed with a soft thud in the dining area, its head swiveling as it scanned the room. I watched, my heart in my throat, as it peered under tables, its hollow eyes searching for something, for someone, for me. I pressed myself flat against the floor, praying that it wouldn't see me. If it returned to the kitchen, my only hope would be the drive-through window. It was a tight squeeze, but I thought that I could fit through it. I waited, counting the seconds before even daring to peek towards the front again. The mascot had vanished around the corner. Maybe, just maybe, if it went into the bathroom, well, then I could make a break for the front door. Every step, every rustle of my clothing seemed deafeningly loud in the silence. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the mascot's location. Was it heading towards the bathroom doors? Or was it coming back? The uncertainty was maddening. I took another risk, crawling closer to the counter. My fingers brushed against the cold tile, ready to hoist myself over it if the opportunity presented itself. But if the mascot hadn't gone into the restrooms, if it returned, I would be trapped. I heard the restroom door creak open. My heart skipped a beat. I knew I only had a few seconds. I scrambled onto the counter, my shoes slipping slightly on the polished surface. I leapt down, my feet hitting the cold tiles with a thud. The exit was just a few yards away. I could make it. I had to. But as luck would have it, my foot caught on something, and I went crashing into one of the tables. The sound of metal chairs scraping across the floor echoed through the empty restaurant. I tried to push myself up, my palms sweaty and my mind racing. The restroom door swung open, and out stepped the mascot. Its dark eye hollows stared right at me, and then, to my horror, it squawked. Not a human sound, but a shrill, chicken-like squawk that sent shivers down my spine. I forced myself to my feet, my eyes darting to the exit. The mascot, with an unnatural speed, was closing the distance between us. I sprinted towards the door, but my earlier fall had slowed me down. The mascot was almost upon me. I could hear its heavy breathing, feel its presence behind me. I crashed through the door and into the night. I could hear it screech again. I raced across the sidewalk, heading towards my car. Just as I reached the edge of the sidewalk, I tripped again, crashing into the parking lot's asphalt. The impact sent a sharp pain up my arms as my palms skidded across the pavement. The mascot screeched, a sound filled with rage and frustration. I turned my head, expecting to see it lunging at me, but instead, it was itself falling. As it hit the sidewalk, its soft plush head popped off and rolled away to reveal nothing. There was no one inside the suit. It was empty. The suit deflated, sinking to the ground as if it had never been occupied. Panting, I pulled myself up, trying to process what had just happened. My gaze shifted to what had tripped the mascot, and there it was. The statue. Its leg was extended, its foot right in the path of the mascot. The statue, with its ever-smiling face, was now winking at me, its hand raised in a salute. "Thanks," I whispered. The statue remained motionless, its huge friendly grin the largest I had seen it yet. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. The cold night air stung my lungs. The dim glow of the sign cast eerie shadows on the pavement. I didn't know what to do. My instincts screamed at me to run, to get away from the place as quick as possible. But I needed that paycheck. I couldn't just walk away. So I waited, my eyes darting around, half expecting the mascot to spring to life again. Time seemed to stretch, each second feeling like an eternity, but then the distant hum of an engine broke the silence. A car pulled into the parking lot, its headlights briefly blinding me. I squinted, trying to make out the driver. The car parked and a large figure stepped out. He walked towards me with a confident stride, his face obscured by shadows. As he drew closer, I could see that he was a big man with a broad build and a kind face. "I'm Tim," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Jim's brother. I'm the opening manager. I'm glad to see you're still here." I hesitated for a moment, then I shook his hand. "Yeah," I replied. "You have trouble?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Why's the mascot suit out here?" I turned back around to look at the restaurant. The statue was back in its usual pose, and beside it on the bench, the mascot suit sat now neatly folded, its head sitting atop the pile. Well, you wouldn't believe me, but it chased me," I said. Tim's eyes widened in surprise. "Wait, why weren't you hiding? You followed the rules, right?" Yeah, I did," I replied. This one just kind of snuck up on me." "It'll do that," he said. We headed inside. Tim quickly surveyed the place, ensuring that everything was in order. "Well, you can head home," he said, giving me a reassuring pat on the back. "You did good." I nodded, relief flooding over me. Thanks. I headed home as quickly as I could. When I got there, I collapsed on my couch. I woke up around 10 a.m. After a bit of thought, I called the restaurant and I talked to Tim. I told him that I couldn't handle the job and I quit. He tried to convince me to stay, but I was determined. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was Jim.
Robert,
He began, his voice unusually serious.
I heard you spoke to Tim. He said you're quitting.
I hesitated, the memories of the previous night flooding back. Yeah, Jim, I can't explain it. Last night was something else. Jim chuckled, but there was no mirth in it.
I know, Robert. The place has its quirks, but you handled it all perfectly. Hatch says that you're the best new hire we've had in decades.
I frowned. The clown painting? Jim sighed.
Look, Robert, I'm not going to pretend that I understand everything that goes on in this place. But I do know this. You're one of the best workers we've had in a long time.
Jim continued.
And I'm willing to triple your wage, Robert. We need someone like you. What we do here is important.
I blinked in surprise. Triple the wage? That was really generous. It was tempting. Very tempting. But last night had been truly terrifying. Yet, as I thought about it, I realized that aside from the encounter with the mascot and the friar, nothing had really been a true threat. The rules, as strange as they were, had kept me completely safe. Plus, there was the statue and Hatch. I took a deep breath. Okay, Jim. I'll see you this evening. And that's where we stand now. I'm just about to head back. But before I did, just in case something happened, I thought that it might be best to document what had happened, what I had experienced. Hopefully things will go well, as long as I follow the rules.